The rusted metal box held a pregnancy test with 2 faint pink lines and a bundle of letters signed M. By midnight, Elena would learn that her father killed someone in 1994. By dawn, she would discover that the person she'd been running from all night was not her mother at all, and that she was the daughter of the man hired to kill her biological mother. But none of that mattered anymore. What mattered was that she was nobody, and nobody could be anyone. 13 hours earlier, the attic smelled like dust and old wood, the kind of dust that settles in your throat and makes you cough. Elena's fingers, covered in a thin layer of grime, gripped the handle of a heavy Victorian-era trunk. She heaved, pulling it across the floorboards toward the light. A sharp screech of wood against wood echoed through the space, mixing with the sound of rain pattering against the roof above. The single hanging bulb cast everything in a sickly golden hue, and the shadows it threw looked older than the house itself. The trunk was heavier than she'd expected. Her muscles burned. She'd come up here looking for old family albums, something to show Marcus about her childhood, evidence that she'd once been happy. Instead, she found herself doing the kind of archaeological work that made her sweater stick to her skin. Her right foot caught on a loose floorboard. The fall happened in frames. First, she was stumbling. Then she was weightless. Then she was slamming sideways into a vertical pine support beam, her right shoulder taking the full force of the impact. The beam shuddered with a hollow crack that made her stomach drop. Dust cascaded from the ceiling rafters in a slow, deliberate shower. She gasped, pain exploding across her shoulder blade, and for a moment she just lay there, breathless, staring up at the rafters above. The beam had shifted. It had tilted maybe 6 inches to the left, opening a cavity in the timber frame behind it. And wedged in that cavity, catching the light from the hanging bulb, was a rusted rectangular metal box. Elena's breath came shallow. She pushed herself up on her hands and knees, pain still radiating across her shoulder, and reached into the opening. The metal was cold despite the warm attic air. Corroded, orange with rust. She wrapped her fingers around what felt like a latch and pulled. The box resisted for a moment, sticky with age and damp, then slid free with a sound like a groan. She carried it to the light. Her hands were trembling now, though she couldn't explain why. The latch was stuck. She pried at it with her fingernails, feeling the metal bite into her skin. The box opened with a metallic scrape that made her wince. Inside, a yellowed pregnancy test strip with 2 faint pink lines. Beside it, a bundle of letters tied with a frayed blue ribbon, the knot cinched so tight it looked like it had been tied decades ago and never touched since. Elena picked up the top letter. The envelope was yellowed, the paper brittle enough to crumble at a careless touch. Dated September 12th, 1994, in neat handwriting. She unfolded it slowly, as if too much force might dissolve it into ash. The handwriting inside was aggressive, slanted, angry. Thomas, you cannot hide her forever. She has your eyes. My silence has a price. Signed, M. Elena's breath hitched. She read the words again, and again. The paper rattled in her hands. She was dimly aware of the rain growing heavier on the roof, the wind testing the attic windows. But mostly she was aware of the cold feeling spreading through her chest, the sensation of something fundamental shifting out of alignment. She heard footsteps on the stairs, heavy, deliberate. Her father's footsteps. Elena clutched the box to her chest, the letters pressing against her ribs through her charcoal sweater, and scrambled to her feet. Thomas appeared at the base of the attic stairs, a silhouette against the hallway light. For a moment, he simply looked at the box in her hands. His face contorted, panic flooding his features. and Elena saw something in that moment that she'd never seen before. Raw fear. "Elena," he said, his voice tight. "What have you found?" She didn't answer. Instead, she tried to push past him toward the stairs. Thomas lunged forward, his large hand gripping her bicep, bruising the skin through her sweater. The pain was sharp and immediate. She gasped, trying to wrench away, but his grip was iron. "Give that to me," he said. Not a request, a demand. His voice had gone cold. Elena reacted on pure instinct. She swung her free elbow backward, catching him in the solar plexus. The air exploded out of him in a wheezing cough, and his grip loosened just enough. She shoved him hard against the banister. The old wood groaned, settling under his weight. And for a terrible moment, she thought it might give way. He stumbled back, off balance, and Elena sprinted down the second-floor hallway. Her boots pounded against the runner rug, the sound of her own heartbeat filling her ears. Behind her, she heard him recovering, heard the rattle of the metal box as she clutched it tighter. "Elena, give that to me. You don't know what you're doing." His voice followed her down the hallway, desperate and raw. She heard the wet sound of his hand slapping against the wall, a gesture of pure frustration. But she was already on the main staircase, already moving toward the kitchen. Her mother stood at the marble island, a glass of red wine in her hand. Martha froze as Elena burst through the swinging doors, her face shifting from surprise to something harder, something calculating. Elena slammed the rusted box onto the marble counter. The wine sloshed over the rim of the glass, staining the white stone with red. "Who is she?" Elena's voice cracked on the question. She reached into the box and pulled out the bundle of letters, pointing a shaking finger at the letter signed M. "Who is M?" Martha's expression didn't change. She looked at the letter for exactly 1 second, then her eyes shifted to Elena's face. "Mina," she said flatly. "Your father's sister." The words landed like a blow. Elena recoiled. "Dad doesn't have a sister." Martha's laugh was brittle, dry, the laugh of someone who'd been holding something in for far too long. She picked up the broken pregnancy test from the counter and snapped it in half with a sharp, decisive click. Plastic fragments scattered across the marble. "He had one," Martha said, leaning in. Her breath smelled of Merlot and something else, something sharp and chemical. "Until he killed her in 1994. That's the secret in the box, Elena. Not an affair. A murder." The kitchen tilted. Elena gripped the edge of the counter to steady herself, but her hands were numb, disconnected from her body. The words didn't make sense. They were words in English, arranged in a comprehensible order, but they refused to form meaning in her mind. "You're lying," Elena whispered. "Do I look like I'm lying?" Martha's voice was cold now, stripped of anything resembling warmth. "Your father murdered his own sister, and I've spent 25 years protecting that secret. So have the others." Elena moved without thinking. She grabbed the box and the letters and turned toward the French doors that led to the garden. Martha didn't move to stop her. She simply watched, with the expression of someone watching an experiment reach its inevitable conclusion. The rain hit Elena like a slap, and the moment she stepped outside. Heavy, relentless. Her boots slipped on the wet grass as she ran toward the garden, her feet treading deep into the mud near the fountain. Behind her, she heard the doors open again. Heard her father, her supposed father, calling her name, his voice breaking with desperation. Thomas tackled her from behind. They crashed together into a bed of wilted autumn hydrangeas, their impact sending spray of mud into the air. It coated Elena's face, her clothes, mixed with the rain, until she couldn't tell the difference between earth and sky. She rolled instinctively, her hands, muddy now, slippery, clawing at his face. Her nails found purchase on the gray silt covering his cheek, raking down hard enough that she felt the skin break beneath her fingernails. Thomas roared, an animal sound of pain and fury, and pinned her wrists down into the sludge. "She's lying, Elena," he gasped. His face was inches from hers, rain and tears mixing on his skin. "Martha's lying. I didn't kill anyone." Elena brought her knee up sharply. Thomas collapsed sideways into the mud with a strangled cry, the air forced from his body. She scrambled up, gasping, her sweater heavy with water, and ran toward her car in the driveway. The key fob was still in her pocket. She hit the button as she ran, and the car's lights flashed once, twice, in response. She yanked open the driver's door, threw herself inside, and locked it with a hard thunk. The engine caught on the second try. She pulled out of the driveway with enough force that gravel sprayed behind her, pinging off the undercarriage of the car. In the rearview mirror, she saw her father emerge from the mud and slime, covered in earth, standing in the rain without moving. He looked like a ghost already. She drove without thinking, the wipers struggling against the downpour. The box sat on the passenger seat, its secrets pressing against the quiet of the car interior. Eventually, she found herself on a dark highway, her headlights cutting through the rain, the dashboard clock reading 11:47 p.m. There was a storage unit facility off Highway 9. She'd driven past it 100 times and never given it a second thought. But now, remembering the small brass key she'd found tucked inside the box, a key with a plastic tag reading 402, she took the exit and pulled into the lot. The facility was mostly empty at night, just rows of corrugated metal doors painted industrial blue. Elena found Unit 402 and inserted the brass key into the padlock. It turned smoothly, surprising her with how easily the mechanism gave way. The lock opened with a loud metallic ring that echoed across the empty lot. She heaved the door up, and it thundered into the ceiling with a crash that made her flinch. Inside, a single wooden chair, a file cabinet, and on the chair, a hospital bag from St. Jude's Medical Center. The lettering faded to a pale blue. Elena's hand shook as she reached for the bag. Inside, she found a white baby blanket embroidered with St. Jude's Maternity in blue thread. Tucked inside the blanket was a birth certificate. She shined her phone's flashlight on the document. Mother's name, Mina Blackwood. Father's name, unknown. Date of birth, October 12th, 1996, Elena's birthday. Her hands had gone numb. She stood there in the storage unit, rain audible in the distance, holding a document that rewrote everything. Mina wasn't her aunt. Mina was her mother, which meant Martha was not her mother, which meant everything, every memory of her childhood, every moment of connection to the woman who'd raised her, was a lie layered on top of another lie. A shadow fell across the doorway. Elena spun, dropping her phone. The light rolled across the concrete floor, illuminating the bottom of a pair of expensive leather shoes. Arthur, the family lawyer, the man who'd been handling her parents' legal affairs for decades. He stood silhouetted against the parking lot lights, his trench coat rain dark, a black umbrella folded under his arm. "Elena," he said quietly, "you're making a terrible mistake." She tried to run, but he was faster than she would have thought possible. He caught her arm, and she felt the same iron grip her father had used, the same bruising force. But his voice remained calm, almost gentle. "Your mother, Martha, sent me to bring you home," he said. "Some things are better left undiscovered." Elena spat at his feet. She pulled away with such violence that her arm nearly dislocated, and then she was running again, back toward her car, the birth certificate still clutched in her hand. Behind her, she heard Arthur calling something, but the wind and the rain swallowed the words. She made it to the highway before her eyes started to blur. The tears came without permission, mixed with the rain and mud still coating her face. She drove faster, the needle climbing on the speedometer, the highway stretching ahead of her like a throat she was descending into. The black SUV appeared in her rearview mirror without warning. High beams, blinding. She blinked, trying to understand what she was seeing, and then the SUV slammed into her rear bumper, a metallic crunch that echoed through her entire body. The steering wheel jerked in her hands. She fought to maintain control, but the SUV came again, and this time it hit harder, sideswiping the driver's door with enough force to spin her car sideways. The road was wet. Her tires screamed against the asphalt, a sound like an animal dying. The car went airborne for a moment that lasted forever, and then it plunged nose first into a ditch. The airbag deployed with a muffled boom, and white powder filled the cabin of the car. Pain exploded across Elena's chest and face. She gasped, choking on the chemical smell of the airbag, her vision clouded by dust. Through the haze, she saw a figure approaching, yellow slicker. She tried to open the door, but something was wrong with the mechanism. The figure reached the window and raised a tire iron high. The glass shattered inward like diamonds. Elena screamed, shielding her face with her arms as sharp fragments cut her skin. Blood immediately welled up along the edges of her palms and fingers. She fumbled for the glove box, her hands wet and slick, and found the brass flashlight she kept there for emergencies. She swung it without looking, and it connected with something solid. A jaw, a cheekbone. The assailant staggered back, blood spraying onto the yellow slicker. Elena didn't wait to see if they recovered. She crawled out of the broken window, her hands shredded by glass, and rolled into the mud. The tall grass beyond the ditch was thick enough to provide cover. She crawled into it, her whole body screaming in pain, and lay there gasping, listening to the sounds of her pursuer moving through the wet vegetation. Time became elastic. She wasn't sure if she crawled for minutes or hours. The rain had lessened to a drizzle by the time she saw the lights of the Blackwood estate through the trees. The greenhouse. She needed to get to the greenhouse. The glass-walled structure stood at the edge of the property. A monument to her mother's, no, to Martha's, obsession with orchids and rare plants. Elena's feet carried her there on pure autopilot, her body moving while her mind was still stuck in the car, still hearing the sound of glass breaking. She stumbled through the greenhouse door and stopped dead. Martha was sitting on a wicker chair in the center of the glass room, surrounded by rows of dead and dying flowers. She held a flare gun loosely in her hand, and on her face was an expression of absolute serenity. The red glow of the flare light reflected off the glass walls, painting everything in blood-red shadows. "I was wondering if you'd make it here," Martha said, not moving from her chair. "I had to account for variables, you understand." Arthur said the impact from the SUV should have been enough to kill you. But you've always been surprisingly resilient. Elena couldn't find words. She simply stood there, covered in blood and mud and glass, staring at the woman who'd raised her. "Thomas didn't kill Mina, Elena," Martha continued, her voice taking on a conversational tone, as if they were discussing the weather. "I did. She was going to take the estate, the name, and you. She was the mother, but I was the Blackwood. I still am." The gun in Martha's hand rose slowly. Elena saw the barrel pointing at her, saw the mechanical simplicity of the flare gun. A device designed to burn brightly for a few moments, to send a signal into the night. Not exactly designed for precision, but at this range, Precision didn't matter. In the garden beyond the glass walls, Elena could see Thomas. He was slumped against a tree, watching through the transparent panes. He made no move to help her. He simply watched with the hollow expression of someone whose entire life had been revealed to be fiction. "You were never a Blackwood anyway, Elena," Martha said, and there was something almost loving in her voice now. "Even from the beginning. Mina's bastard. Your real father was nothing but a laborer, a man she picked up at a bar. I told Thomas we should never have taken you in, but he was weak. He always was." Martha's finger tightened on the trigger. The orange glow was visible through the plastic housing of the gun, a brightness building like a small sun coming into being. Elena closed her eyes. This was the end, then. This was how the story concluded, not with answers, but with final solutions. Not with understanding, but with oblivion. The greenhouse door exploded inward. Thomas. He'd finally moved. He'd finally broken free of whatever paralysis held him, and he'd hurled himself at the door with enough force to rip it from its hinges. Martha flinched, her shot going wild, and the flare gun discharged with a deafening bang. A bright orange projectile screamed through the air and struck the glass ceiling above them. Panels shattered, cascading down in glittering shards. Orange smoke filled the greenhouse like a chemical fog. Elena lunged forward through the chaos. She grabbed a heavy terracotta pot from a nearby table and brought it down on Martha's head with all the force she could summon. Red clay shattered, exploding into fragments and dirt. Martha's body went limp, her grip on the flare gun loosening. The DNA envelope was on the floor, partially buried in the debris. Elena grabbed it. She didn't wait to see if Martha moved again. She ran through the smoking greenhouse, through the destroyed doorway, past Thomas, who was now wrestling with Arthur, who she now understood had been the one in the yellow slicker, who had tried to kill her on the highway. Thomas tripped Arthur. The lawyer sprawled forward, his momentum carrying him directly into the stone fountain. The collision made a wet, sickening sound. Bone against unforgiving stone. Arthur didn't get up. Elena ran. She ran toward the sirens that were now visible in the distance. Lights flickering between the trees like approaching salvation. She didn't look back at the estate. She didn't look back at the family that had been alive from the beginning. She simply ran until the red and blue lights found her, until hands grabbed her shoulders. Gentle hands this time, wearing uniform sleeves, and guided her toward safety. The police precinct was fluorescently bright, aggressively clean. Elena sat on a plastic chair in a waiting room that smelled like cleaning fluid and human desperation. Her hands were wrapped in medical bandages, each finger carefully protected by blue medical tape. She'd answered questions for hours. She'd given statements. She'd signed papers and heard words like evidence and investigation and self-defense. Somewhere in the facility, Martha was being processed. Somewhere else, Thomas was waiting. Arthur was in a hospital, his spine partially compressed from the impact with the fountain, conscious but not talking. The unmarked envelope sat on Elena's lap. She'd kept it with her through all the processing, all the questioning. The police had taken the letters, the pregnancy test, the birth certificate from the storage unit. But they'd missed this envelope, or perhaps they'd deliberately left it. One small piece of evidence that belonged to her alone. The fluorescent lights hummed overhead. Elena tore open the envelope with her bandaged fingers, the motion clumsy but effective. A single sheet of paper slid out. It was a DNA comparison chart. Bar graphs, genetic markers. At the bottom, in black ink, a single line. Probability of biological relationship to Thomas Blackwood, 0.00%. She wasn't his. She had never been his. She turned to the next page. Subject DNA matches Jane Doe, Najra 1994A, Mina Blackwood. So that was confirmed. Mina was her mother. Mina, who Martha had killed. Mina, who had written angry letters demanding recognition, demanding her daughter back. Elena's eyes continued down the page. There was a third match, a name that made her stomach drop all over again. Subject also matches paternal DNA for Arthur Vance, the lawyer. Arthur, the man Martha had married decades ago, before he'd left their family law firm and become simply the family lawyer. A fixture so familiar they'd stopped seeing him as a person. Arthur, who'd been Mina's lover. Arthur, who'd fathered a child with Mina and then watched that child be stolen by Thomas and Martha to use as a weapon, a shield, a tool to maintain the family's careful fiction. Elena laughed. It started as something quiet, trapped in her chest, and then it escaped as a real sound. A dark, bitter laugh that echoed through the precinct waiting room. A police officer glanced in her direction, saw her laughing with her head back and her hands wrapped in medical tape, and decided not to interfere. The sun was rising when they finally let her go. No charges. Self-defense was written into the official report. The storage unit, the letters, the pregnancy test. All of it would become evidence in what would eventually be a very complicated trial involving inheritance, elder abuse, attempted murder, and acts now clearly defined by law and moral clarity alike. But none of that was Elena's problem anymore. She found a diner on the outskirts of town, one with yellow Formica booths and a window that looked out onto a parking lot, and the promise of empty highway beyond. She ordered breakfast: bacon, eggs, hash browns, toast, and a coffee so black it looked like it might contain an olive space. The waitress, a woman with tired eyes and a name tag reading Sue, brought the food without comment and refilled her coffee 3 times without being asked. Elena ate slowly, letting each bite settle in her stomach. She'd forgotten what hunger felt like. The salt and fat of the bacon was sharp and alive on her tongue. The eggs were runny in the center, the way she'd always preferred them, though no one in the family, no, in the house where she'd lived, had ever bothered to ask how she liked them prepared. She pulled out her phone. The battery was at 8%, but she had enough for what she needed to do. She opened her contacts. Mom. Dad. Dad's attorney. Each entry was a small lie, a fiction that had provided structure to her entire life. She deleted them, all of them, blocked the numbers, cleared the call history. When she was done, the contact list looked like something belonging to a person who just emerged into the world fully formed, with no history, no obligations, no gravity holding them to any particular place or time. The waitress appeared again with fresh coffee. "Anything else, honey?" Sue asked. The question delivered with the casual kindness of someone who'd asked it 1,000 times to 1,000 different people. Elena looked up. The morning sun was coming through the diner window at an angle that turned everything golden. The dust motes in the light looked like diamonds now, like tiny, valuable things that had always been worthless, always been dirt, but looked beautiful when the light caught them right. "Just a coffee," Elena said. "Black, like my future." She meant it as a joke, something to make the woman smile. Sue did smile, a quick flash of warmth. And then she was gone, back behind the counter, back to whatever infinite day she was living. Elena leaned back in the booth. She pulled the jukebox selector device toward her across the table and tried to insert one of the old letters into the coin slot, just to see. The paper was too thick, too fragile. It wouldn't fit, wouldn't work. She laughed anyway, not at the absurdity of the gesture, but at something deeper. Something about the nature of trying to force the past into spaces designed for the present. She finished her coffee. She paid with cash, leaving a generous tip for Sue. She walked out of the diner into the morning sun, and she didn't look back at the building or the parking lot or the life she was leaving behind. The highway stretched out ahead of her, empty in both directions. She had no destination, no address written down, no plan beyond the next hour. She had no name that felt true to her anymore. Elena had belonged to the Blackwoods, and the Blackwoods no longer existed. She had no family, no inheritance waiting, no trust fund. She had the clothes on her back, a half-tank of gas, and the absolute certainty that she was nobody, which meant she could become anyone. She got into the car that the estate had paid for, that she'd destroy eventually or abandon or trade in, it didn't matter, and pulled back onto the highway. The GPS was dark. The radio was off. There was nothing but the sound of the engine and the tires and the vast, indifferent sky opening up ahead of her like a question mark. The odometer ticked forward. Miles accumulated. Hours passed. She drove past signs for places she'd never been, towns with names that meant nothing to her yet. The sun climbed higher, then began its descent. By evening, she'd be someone else's neighbor, someone else's stranger at a diner counter. She'd be a voice without history, a face without context. The future was blank. The past was ash. And for the first time in her life, Elena, whoever Elena was, felt something like freedom. Not the euphoria of escape, not the relief of survival. Something simpler, something colder. The clear, sharp knowledge that nothing could touch her anymore, because nothing had ever really owned her in the first place. She was nobody, and that was everything.